Good to see you here today, this afternoon, for our talk with Dr. Artel Great on his book, The Black Pack, Comedy, Race, and Resistance. We're very grateful to have Dr. Great here today to talk with you. Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that the library is located on the area now known as San Francisco, which is on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples of the San Francisco Peninsula. As the original peoples of this land, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never lost nor forgotten their responsibilities as the caretakers of this place, and we recognize that we benefit from living, working, and learning on their traditional homeland. As uninvited guests, we affirm their sovereign rights as First Peoples and wish to pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush community. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Shauna Sherman. I'm the manager of the African American Center, which is on the third floor of this building. And as the African American Center, we also honor the gifts, resilience, and sacrifices of our Black ancestors who toiled the land, built the institutions that established the city's wealth and freedom, and survived anti-Black racism despite never being compensated nor fully realizing their own sovereignty. And because of their work, we are here and we are investing in their legacy. As I mentioned, the African American Center is on the third floor of this building. I hope you all have a chance to check us out. Anybody been there yet before? A few people? Great. So it was established in 1996 along with the rest of this building by community as a place for Blackness in the library. We host a collection of books by and about Black people. We host exhibits, author event, book clubs, and do our best to work with community organizations to amplify Black creatives. You can sign up for our newsletter in the back to hear what's happening. But right now in the African American Center, we've got a great exhibit called We've Got Soul that's all about how hip-hop culture influence sneaker culture in this country, how hip-hop, basketball, and street culture brought about sneaker culture. It's a great exhibit done by our African-American librarian, Rachel, and please check it out. As always, thank you to the support of our custodial and media services department for helping making these programs happen, and to our colleagues on the third floor. Library programs are supported by the Friends of the San Francisco Public Library, and thank you to them and to the donors, original donors and of the center. We are so grateful to be hosting Dr. Great here this evening to talk about his new book. Please pick up a flyer before you leave to get a QR code for a list of the materials available at the library that he's going to talk about tonight. We actually have a lot of the movies that the Black Pack created in the 80s available for checkout. And next Wednesday, same place, same time, we'll be screening Coming to America, which is the quintessential Black Pack movie by Eddie Murphy, which would be great to see again, and I'm sure we'll see a few clips of it here tonight. I'm going to introduce Dr. Great before we bring him out for you this evening. Dr. Artel Great is a leading cinema and media scholar, Independent Spirit Award-nominated filmmaker, and cultural critic whose work examines the politics, poetics, and possibilities of Black life on screen. He is the author of the landmark book, The Black Pack, Comedy, Race, and Resistance, and co-editor of Black Cinema and Visual Culture, Art and Politics in the 21st Century. He holds a George and Judy Marcus Endowed Chair in the African American Cinema Studies and is Associate Professor of Cinema and Media Studies at San Francisco State University. He's going to give a little presentation. We're going to have a short convo, and then we'll have Q&A for you. So let's all give a big round of applause for Dr. Artel Great.
Hey, thank you so much, Shauna, for that lovely introduction and for organizing this illustrious event for us all here today, and to all of the people at the San Francisco Public Library for making this event possible. I'm energized to be here as a contemporary cultural critic. I am here tonight to extend the rich tradition of cultural critics who include people like James Baldwin, Bell Hooks, and Toni Morrison. It is my aim to carry forth the tradition of such individuals who have been so deeply impactful for me and inspiring to me in my life. My work in particular centralizes the politics of American film and television, particularly Black cinema, as a launching pad for being able to make critical connections at the intersection of race, class, politics, and economics. My aim is to question how we as a people tend to encounter these issues and forces as a part of the politics of our everyday lives. So before we begin tonight with my remarks, I traditionally like to start each conversation and dialogue with a piece of music because that really situates us in the thematics that we'll be talking about this evening. So the song that I'm going to play here is from 1974. It was released by the great late poet and singer Gil Scott-Heron. It's winter in America. In a nation that just can't stand much more, the Constitution, a noble piece of paper, with free society, struggled but died in vain. And now democracy is ragtime on the corner hoping for some rain. And nobody's fighting because nobody knows what to say because it's winter in America. You see, in 1970, Gil Scott-Heron's soulful sounds and jazz-infused poetry laid the groundwork for the emergence of hip-hop music, which would appear later in the decade. But it also set the stage for the spoken word poetry scene, which was crystallized 20 years later in cinema commercially through a film like Love Jones. But in this particular song, Winter in America, Gil Scott-Heron's words represent a hard slap in the face of the establishment, tackling major cultural issues that range from poverty and desperation that was raging through the Black communities to his magnum opus, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. And yet, Winter in America broadcasts certain uncomfortable truths. And I would argue that today we are in the winter of late America, facing outrage erupting across the United States following widespread corruption, police violence, ICE raids, Minneapolis, California, Chicago, and the toxic politics of governance. And it cannot be overlooked that these conditions have once again fabulously revealed America's racial demons as we bear witness to social uprisings and protests as the streets catch fire once again. Catch fire with the pain. Catch fire with suffering. Catch fire with resistance. Catch fire with the endless streams of injustice. Catch fire with the endless streams of greed and systemic racism. And so it is from this perspective that foregrounds the social and cultural context that underpins our journey and conversation here tonight. Through one of the most electrifying, resilient, hilarious, and powerful periods of American cultural history, as we discuss the new book, The Black Pack, Comedy, Race, and Resistance. Now, this is the first literary work to really chronicle the untold history and the cultural moment and the collaborations that took place behind the scenes when 5 legendary comedians, Eddie Murphy, Paul Mooney, Keenen Ivory Wayans, Robert Townsend, and Arsenio Hall came together to form a comedy supergroup in the late 1980s. And what they did essentially together was create a series of socially and politically charged films and television shows that not only revolutionized popular culture, but it also changed the face of American comedy. Very few people are aware of this alliance known as the Black Pack. But they work together behind the scenes as comics, as consultants, as writers, as directors, as producers, as actors. And their mission was really to speak truth to power, to use comedy to challenge Hollywood's norms and to critique the underlying assumptions of race in America. And ultimately, they created some of the most profitable, provocative, and enduring works of comedy of the 20th century. Classics like these, Coming to America, In Living Color, Harlem Nights, The Five Heartbeats, The Arsenio Hall Show, and more. So tonight I'm just going to talk a little bit about the book and detail some of the innovative ways that the Black Pack used humor to transform 80s and 90s social tension into art and into commercial success. And they did this, which is really interesting, while expanding opportunities both behind the scenes, but also professional opportunities and artistic opportunities for new generations of Black creative image makers. And they did this all while thumbing their nose at the establishment and speaking truth to power. So the first thing I want to talk about is the name, right? The Black Pack. Essentially, the Black Pack name is really a snarky reference to two Hollywood cohorts. The first is the Rat Pack, right, from the 1960s, which included Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Dean Martin, Peter Lawford, and others. And the Rat Pack were really known for their films, but also known for their shenanigans in the Las Vegas Strip and the nightclub performances that they would deliver. Now, the second group is the Brat Pack, right, which was a 1980s cohort of young white actors that included folks like Molly Ringwald, Rob Lowe, Ali Sheedy, Emilio Estevez, and others. And this group, the Brat Pack, actually appeared in numerous films throughout the decade of the 1980s, mostly coming-of-age films like The Breakfast Club. So the name, the Black Pack, right, is a play on words, a snarky allusion to those two Hollywood groups that really centered white celebrities. And the name, the Black Pack, really speaks to the group's embrace of their own identity as outsiders in Hollywood, right? They understood that they were on the margins. They were marginalized artists, and their goal was to turn the margins into the mainstream. So you had Eddie Murphy in the center, who is the superstar of the group. Paul Mooney, the gentleman with the dope hat, he was what I like to think of as the group's ideological architect. And then there was Robert Townsend, who is to the right of Eddie Murphy. He was the Renaissance man. Keenen Ivory Wayans was the wild card, and of course, Arsenio Hall was the hype man. Woo, woo, woo. So this group, the Black Pack, the name actually was coined by Paul Mooney, Oakland's own. And I like to think of him as the group's kind of comedic architect. And so as the story goes, they were all hanging out in one of Eddie Murphy's kind of like plush hotel rooms. And Arsenio Hall made this comment that, you know, we could really get farther as in our career if we banded together as a group as opposed to, you know, working against each other. And one of them remarked like, yeah, you know, because that's a good idea. Because, you know, nobody's going to hire us to star in the next John Hughes film. And it was in that moment that Paul Mooney responds with his very distinct, acerbic wit. He responded back, you know, really quickly. He said, no, nobody going to hire us for no John Hughes film because they got the Brat Pack and we the Black Pack, homie. We the Black Pack. And boom, there you have it. The name was crystallized in that moment. And it really refers to their ability to embrace their role as Hollywood outsiders, right? They understood that blackness within the American context oftentimes positions people as outsiders in America, teetering on the margins where the only certainty is uncertainty. So from 1987 to 1994, the Black Pack created 24 wildly popular films and TV shows. And the defining feature of their work was their ability to use humor, their ability to use comedy, and the satirization of race as a form of social critique. They somehow managed to use commercial film, network television to weaponize comedy. In other words, they were using comedy to challenge the often narrow depictions of black life on screen. And what's really interesting and ironic is that through their critique of the system, as a result, that really catapulted their success. So rather than, really presenting biographies of the individual performers, the book itself focuses on the Black Pac's most provocative, most enduring, and illustrious works that were created during their peak popularity. So what I do in the book really is explore their cultural work, their emblematic material, through a philosophical and stylistic lens to really understand the dimensions of what they were seeking to achieve and consider the ways in which that the Black Pac revolutionized popular culture. So more specifically, what I'm interested in the book is this idea of comedy that says very serious things, right? Not just comedy for the sake of comedy. I'm reminded of the words of Hollywood filmmaker Billy Wilder, who said that if you're gonna tell the truth, then you better make it funny. Otherwise, they're gonna kill you. So I'm interested in comedy that addresses very real-world dilemmas as a potential tool for social and cultural intervention. And so the framework that I use to think this through is a concept that I've developed to describe this form of humor, and I call it Black resistance humor. And Black resistance humor is essentially a form of cultural expression that engages the subversive, sometimes confrontational, often salty language of comedy, satire, parody, irony, and political humor as a means of giving voice to racial trauma, resisting corrupt authority, and promoting social justice and Black empowerment. So what you can really think about Black resistance humor is really a form of what I would like to call laughtivism, right? Using laughter as a form of activism. And so I'll give you a clear early example of this type of Black resistance humor that emerged from the Black Pac. This is a clip from Eddie Murphy in one of his rare appearances on Saturday Night Live as a host post his time as a cast member. This particular sketch is called White Like Me. Anybody seen that before? Yeah, no, this sketch really triggers certain fundamental questions about the nation's racial issues and the discrepancy between Black and white America. Now, the banking sequence is my favorite part, right? Because it's both comically sharp and intellectually sharp. It lampoons the discriminatory practices, the discriminatory lending practices, right, of banks. It lampoons the redlining policies that jeopardized and thwarted Black home ownership and social mobility that took place over 100 years in America. And through this sketch, what Eddie Murphy actually does is he uses racial satire. He uses the special effects makeup to expose and critique whiteness and to expose and critique this secret world of white privilege. And this type of critique is really at the heart of the Black Pac strategy, right? And this strategy really generated a rapturous social velocity in the late 1980s. So through the book, what I really do is give a genealogy of Black resistance humor, and I use these examples to kind of trace it back to really the early part of the 19th century. So the ironic fiction writings of people like William Wells Brown and Charles W. Chestnut really represent the first wave of Black resistance humor in the early part of the 19th century. William Wells Brown was a contemporary of Frederick Douglass. Brown was born into enslavement. He escaped enslavement twice, and he became the first Black novelist and the first Black playwright. Taught himself how to read and write. And he wrote a play about enslavement. It was called The Escape, or A Leap for Freedom. and it was published in 1858. And in this play, he uses this complex form of irony and satire to depict the really horrific nature of enslavement itself. He parodies certain stereotypes of race that slavery produced in a hyperbolic way, and he did so in order to sabotage his power. Now, Chestnut, on the other hand, he wrote a short fiction piece called The Conjure Woman, and this was published in 1899. And within this particular piece, what Chestnut does is he uses humor to highlight the lack of dominion that the enslaved population had over their own bodies. So his use of comedy really, in his tales, often takes on the sound of tragedy and the recognition of the dispossession of black bodies. Now, the pioneers of the second wave of black resistance humor really emerged from the work of George Walker and Burt Williams. Now, these two were actually the first black stars of the Broadway theater scene, which is really interesting. And what they did was they used language and parody to dismantle racist representations. Williams' picture here on the left, he often performed in blackface. And he did so in order to subvert the form, right? He wanted to challenge the vulgarity of blackface in order to dismantle its claims of racial authenticity. James Baldwin writes about this later, and he calls this process of black performativity, he calls it a smuggled in reality, right? Because black artists during this period had to smuggle in certain counter narratives in order to express resistance within the confines of the material that they were given to perform in. Now, by the 1920s, the third wave of black resistance humor materialized in the Harlem Renaissance. So you have folks like Zora Neale Hurston, Rudolph Fisher, Wallace Thurman, Langston Hughes, and Ralph Ellison, obviously the Invisible Man. These all use black resistance humor to varying degrees and in various capacities in order to resist and push back against corrupt authority. Now, Moms Mabley and Red Fox, yeah, that's Red Fox from Sanford and Son. That's one of them young pictures. Look at him, looking cool, real smooth. They also were like vaudeville holdovers, and what they were able to do was use black folk culture to advance the third wave of black resistance humor. And they both use stand-up and characters and this kind of rebellious, often scatological humor in order to engage not only black folk tradition and familiarity, but to push back against racial conditions. The fourth wave is found in the work of Dick Gregory. And his work is really powerful because Dick Gregory really was the first black comic to perform before integrated audiences. Hugh Hefner gave him an opportunity to perform at the Playboy Club in Chicago, and that was really a breakthrough moment. And Dick Gregory became the most mainstream black comic alongside, Bill Cosby during the 1960s. But the difference was Dick Gregory's humor was blistering in terms of his critique of the ancient network of American racism. And at the height of his popularity, Dick Gregory paid a tremendous cost for speaking out with his humor. He would perform his humor, but oftentimes he would cancel performances in order to engage in the civil rights movement, in order to go to different marches and speak out against the racist conditions that black people were faced with during this particular time. And as a result of this, he paid a tremendous price in terms of his career because he became ostracized in Hollywood. Now, the fifth wave of black resistance humor is ushered in by Richard Pryor and Oakland's own Paul Mooney in the 1970s during the Black Pact and the Black Power movement. Mooney and Pryor are really unique because they advance this new black comedic modernity. And they invented this new comedic persona. And it was really Paul Mooney who ushered this in, injecting Richard Pryor with this idea that the only way to do something substantial in terms of comedy was to engage issues of race. And so Pryor and Mooney, in relationship to the Black Pack, Richard Pryor was never a member of the group, but he was like the group's father figure, if you will. Whereas Paul Mooney was a part of the Black Pack movement, and he was the group's ideological architect. Now, the table of contents for the book really lays out, if you could see this, how the book is structured. Chapter 1, The Planet Provocative. Chapter 2, Black Star Power, looks at the economics of Eddie Murphy. Chapter 3, Hollywood Shuffle, The Mothership. And then Chapter 4 is The Hypnotist Litmus, which looks at, like I said, the Hypnotist Litmus, which looks at the Arsenio Hall Show and Living Color. So the Black Pack really usher in this kind of sixth wave of black resistance humor, if you will. And they did so alongside people like Whoopi Goldberg, people like Robin Harris, the late Robin Harris, and Tim Reed are also proponents of this model. So what I like to do really quickly here is read a brief excerpt from the introduction of the book just to give you a feel for how we get down. In yet another paranoid and virulent social and political climate, Black Americans once again find ourselves pushing back against noxious anti-Black agendas and pushing back against the devastatingly lethal virus of American racism. The nation, as we know it, is breaking open again. This time it is the coldest winter of our discontent in the twilight of late America. And it is now, perhaps, as it has been forever, boundlessly exhausting to be Black in this country, and always already required to navigate the willfully hostile world that is far too eager to make deadly assumptions regarding our will to live or simply be in the world. Such assumptions, as it were, have not, of course, been produced by Black Americans. These contradictions represent perhaps the greatest national failure that has putrefied the very roots of the American system of reality. And it has done so for far too long. Still, Black Americans continue to rise. We continue to resist, to subvert, to rebel, and we do so in booms, in busts, in movements, in peaks, in cycles, in valleys, in vogue, and in vain. Ironically, and perhaps predictably, the outcry for social justice in the early part of the 21st century has generated an energetic burst of interest in Black cinema and visual culture. And the role of Black American comedy and satire has been elevated to a new vanguard level of cultural relevancy. Because I find today that the cutting edge of Black American humor is imbued with a renewed sense of social urgency. Critiques, signaling perhaps a return to an era in our culture when comedians like the Black Pack emerged as Hollywood rebels and as symbols of resilience in a racially and politically charged nation. Just as skillful as they were at playing the dozens, the Black Pack were equally proficient at playing the fool. And that is, however, not to be confused with being foolish. The Black Pack were playing the fool. Quite the contrary. They used humor to make fools of the wise. In fact, they represent a paradox. The irony of their humor, though categorized as purportedly vapid and foolish by some, actually reveals the Black Pack as beholders of wisdom, illuminating social ills with an ease that evades the powers that be. They were clever fools, wise fools, full of wisdom, full of fortitude, calling attention to the austere and malignant scourge of whiteness and systemic racism that floats like a corpse in the waters of American life. And they're boldly urging white folks to wake up because the joke's on you. See, from the jump, the Black Pack encouraged black artists to raise their voices in both comedy and in culture. And now their work has inspired new generations. And this time, they coming for 40 acres and a movie. So what I'm going to do now is just highlight a few moments of the Black Pack's engagement with black resistance humor. And I'm going to start with the work of Paul Mooney. Bay Area. Paul Mooney is really the foundation of chapter 1 in the book, and I'm really thrilled about that because I am the first person to critically historicize his contribution to American popular culture and to American humor. I wish he was alive to see this contribution because I know he would get a kick out of it. Mooney described his comedy as a nuclear bomb. He says, when I tell jokes, it just blows up and flattens everybody, which is actually quite true. Mooney's humor forces us to deal with certain things. And I'll give you a quick little example right here from the Laugh Factory. Only been black for 5 minutes and I already hate you, white folks. Mooney's comedy forces us to wrestle with the pernicious racial ghosts that define our nation's past and that haunts our present and that threatens to engulf our future. And not many people are aware, but Paul Mooney was actually the ghostwriter for Richard Pryor. And he wrote the jokes, Richard Pryor performed the jokes. And together, they broke new ground in terms of American comedy, ushering in this idea of street language and profanity in their routines as a way of addressing the nation's searing racial temperature. In 1977, they came together to work on a series for NBC called The Richard Pryor Show. And this was way, way ahead of its time. It was a sketch comedy program that really laid the ideological blueprint for the Black Pack when they picked up this kind of template, I would say about a decade or so later, and they really advanced it. And you can see the connection in terms of programs like Robert Townsend and His Partners in Crime, which was on HBO in the 90s, and then also in Living Color. Now, my favorite sketch from the Richard Pryor Show in 1977 is a sketch called Egypt 1909. Okay, and in this sketch, which I'm gonna play for you, I'll set it up. So it's Egypt in 1909. So Richard Pryor and a group of white archaeologists, which include Robin Williams, the late Robin Williams, they just discovered this ancient Egyptian tomb, right? And inside the tomb, Richard Pryor discovers what he calls the Book of Life. And he starts to read the Book of Life, and the revelations that are in this book are quite remarkable. My favorite part, that's my favorite sketch. What this sketch does is it employs black resistance humor in a way that is satirical, but it's also deeply ironic, right? It's offering this retelling, this very black retelling of human history, disrupting narratives of Eurocentrism while highlighting the historical erasure of black contributions to civilization. And it was just too real. You know, he said, "Right to the brothers, see this." The show was canceled after 4 episodes. So leading the charge for the Black Pack in the 80s was, of course, Eddie Murphy. These are his Black Pack films. And in a press conference that he delivered for the marketing of Beverly Hills Cop Part 2 is when he actually formally announces the formation of the Black Pack. And he describes the group and their culturally rebellious comedic possibilities and their kind of signature comedic style. And it's important to note this because the success of the Black Pack arrives at a moment in American history that was a period of conservative political backlash, right? Under the presidential politics of Ronald Reagan, when the nation had become increasingly tolerant of anti-black rhetoric, which resulted in an economic deconstruction of many black communities. Combine that with the state-sponsored violence and the state-sponsored crack cocaine epidemic, which led to skyrocketing rates of mass incarceration, and then the subsequent war on drugs, which was devastatingly lethal to the fabric of black America. So the reality of these social conditions, I think, is very meaningful and actually very important when we think about the rise of the Black Pac's popularity in terms of culture. It makes it more meaningful. Now, Eddie Murphy's engagement with Black resistance humor is really sophisticated because it really relies on flipping the script on the way in which Blackness is represented in Hollywood. If you think about Coming to America, for example, on the one hand, you might say, well, what's satirical about Coming to America? But you think about it like this, right? Before Marvel's Black Panther and Wakanda Forever, we had Zamunda. And Zamunda is this fictitious, opulent African nation that Eddie Murphy describes in the film. And his comedic strategy in the film articulates a politicization of Black identity through visual metaphors. So what he's doing in the film is he's portraying Africa as a site of beauty, Africa as a site of wealth, Africa as a site of opulence, in direct opposition to the media images of Africa that are prevalent during that time, right? Africa as a continent in crisis, Africa as starvation and poverty, right? These are the images that are prevalent in the mainstream media during this time. So what Eddie Murphy is doing through his Black Pac films is he's trying to decentralize whiteness, right? He went from being like the black buddy in Beverly Hills Cop and Trading Places to being to creating these all Black worlds where there are rarely white people in it at all. And what he's doing is he's reinscribing Blackness in a way that celebrates being Black and its value. Now, Robert Townsend is really interesting because he takes a totally different approach to Black resistance humor. His approach is way more confrontational. His masterpiece, his satirical masterpiece, Hollywood Shuffle. Anybody seen Hollywood Shuffle? Okay, a couple people, that's cool. This is an interesting film because it's like a lot of it takes place in these flashback fever dream sequences. But Hollywood Shuffle tells the story of this young Black actor, Bobby Taylor, who wants to make it big in the movie business. And what he does, Townsend that is he uses the film to confront the vulgar role of racism in Hollywood. And the film's politically Black energy really comes from its disruption and confrontation of racial caricatures that exist in American media. This particular clip is from the film, and it's this sequence called The Black Acting School. Now, Townsend's humor really simmers with defiance and social awareness of the political and professional injustices that Black actors face in the ruthless and often cutthroat film industry. What's interesting is there's a moment in the film before he goes in on an audition for a role, and the guy next to him tells him, look, don't sell out, brother. Don't be a butler or a slave. And what's really interesting about this is that's 1987. Fast forward to the year 2014. Yeah, the most successful Black films of that year, The Butler and 12 Years a Slave. You can't make this up. So the movie is, in many ways, quite prophetic, right? No discussion of the 20th century television is complete without talking about the Arsenio Hall Show. It was really pioneering in terms of its ability to retain a distinct Black voice while operating within a white corporate environment that had no interest in understanding Black expressive culture. But it was really a cornerstone of the Black Pac movement. He basically infiltrated late night television and did what many people thought was veritably impossible, and that was overthrow the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. But also what Arsenio Hall did with his show, he employed a lot of Black people behind the scenes in terms of positions that they couldn't get access to. So I'm talking about camera operators, right, talent coordinators. So the hiring practices were very important to the Black Pac because it demonstrated the type of solidarity that was at the heart of their agenda. Likewise, Keenen Ivory Wayans struck gold with his sketch comedy series In Living Color. And these are his Black Pac films. And he draws inspiration, obviously, from the Richard Pryor show in 1977. But he developed this particular series in Living Color, and he created really a blockbuster scenario for himself. He was the creator of the show, he was the director of the show, he was the writer, he was the executive producer, and he was the star, right? That was an unparalleled arrangement for a black creative on network television at the time. And like the Arsenio Hall Show and Living Color, they're both really steeped in this articulation of this emerging culture of hip-hop. And Living Color had a DJ, SW1, right? It had a dance group, the Fly Girls, which featured a future pop star, J-Lo. It also featured choreography by Rosie Perez. And the show is really steeped in this politically black satire, and it became a breakout hit for the Fox television network. And one of the first things that Keenen Ivory Wayans did when he got the show was he hired Paul Mooney to be one of the writers for the show. And Paul Mooney created memorable characters like the militant jester, Homie the Clown. One of my favorite sketches from the series is from season 1, and it's a sketch called The Wrath of Farrakhan. And it's really a politically black exploration of the Star Trek series. Got any Trekkies out here? Any Trekkies? Okay, we got a few Trekkies. This sketch was written by Paul Mooney, and it really peels back the layers of whiteness and its invisible political dominance that upends the traditional power dynamics on the Enterprise, and is really aligning with a black social consciousness while also appealing to the Trekkies. Ken, let's go to the next slide. And at their peak, the Black Pack enjoyed an unparalleled success. For a moment, they were really Hollywood darlings, and they leveraged their comedic talents to achieve public recognition. Unlike many entertainers of that period, they didn't seek to dilute their racial identity. The Black Pack, to their credit, did not seek to transcend race, right? Instead, what they were more interested in was strategically embracing their blackness unapologetically, utilizing America's preoccupations with race to their advantage. And today we see new generations of comedic voices that pick up on these innovations, and you can see the echoes of the Black Pack's work and their output. I'm thinking about people like Wanda Sykes, Chris Rock, Cat Williams, Amanda Seales, Dave Chappelle, Josh Johnson, Gerard Carmichael, Donald Glover, and a few others are a testament to this enduring legacy of black resistance humor. And in the final analysis, I would say that the Black Pack represents an artistic moment and an artistic movement that employed this provocative, very much politically charged comedy that's on the one hand very serious, but also very hilarious. And they did so across multiple platforms. You could see them on stand-up. You could catch them on HBO or cable or network television or at the movies as well. And what they did as a result was create this really ironic collage of culture that expresses a process whereby which marginalized groups are able to view their experiences as a type of counter-memory against the grain of dominant culture. And in my opinion, I would argue that they prove once and for all that entertainment can have social relevancy and that comedy can in fact be used to say very serious things. Thank you. Feel free to scan this QR code. It'll take you to the website. You can order the book if you haven't, if you would like to, and you can put in the discount code right there that's on the screen, RUP30, and you can get the that nice little discount on the low. So, yeah, Shauna.
All right, thank you, Dr. Great. Let's give Dr. Great one more round of applause.
My pleasure. Thank you.
It's a wonderful, wonderful conversation, and I'm not going to take up too much time because I'm sure you all have questions, and we're going to run a mic around in a second. But can we just start a little bit with you, because we didn't get to learn anything about you. So how did this journey start for you? I know that you've acted some, right? So why this fascination with the Black Pack movies, TV from the 80s and 90s?
So I'm from Chicago, Chi-Town, stay repping. And I grew up in a moment where these figures were quite prominent. And I write about this a little bit in the book, and I feel like it actually unlocked something inside of me. So on the west side of Chicago, there was this walk-in closet at my grandmother's house, right? And in this walk-in closet, there were these old VHS tapes. And my uncle was the archivist, right? The unofficial archivist of these VHS tapes. And he told me that at one point there were about 10,000 videotapes in this closet. And they were all black films and television shows. And I would sneak into this closet during the weekends at my grandmother's house, and I would watch these old tapes. And I was far too young to be doing that. That's why I was sneaking. But I would stay up all night, me and my cousins and I, and that was my first encounter with the Black Pack material. I was watching the 5 Heartbeats, In Living Color, obviously, but also the I'm Gonna Get You Sucker. And to me, these works were just funny. I didn't really understand or have the capacity or language to understand how these works were actually disrupting the status quo. Fast forward to, they were just funny. And the Black Pack material brought us together, the family together. Coming to America was my favorite Black Pack film. My mom and I, we watched that movie over and over. We wore that tape out, you hear me? And we didn't just watch it like, passively. We memorized the whole movie. And we would talk to the screen, and we competed against each other to see who could go the longest without making a mistake. And that was the apex of our fandom, right? And so fast forward to grad school at UCLA, they released the DVD of the Richard Pryor show. And I didn't know that Richard Pryor had a TV show in the 70s. I was like, what is this? So I actually got those DVDs and started studying that, and I found out that Paul Mooney was a writer, and then I started looking into Paul Mooney, and then that just led me down this rabbit hole that led me to the Black Pack. And so it turned out that the material that I was sneaking into the closet watching, at my grandmother's house, I was actually doing research. And I didn't even know it.
I like that, sneaking as research. Speaking of DVDs and stuff, like, do you know where we can find like old copies of the Arsenio Hall Show, old copies watch like In Living Color?
Yeah, In Living Color is available on DVD. The Arsenio Hall Show is, I think, a little bit tricky because it was a syndicated show. So it's owned by Paramount and Paramount Television. So finding that is a little bit tricky. I mean, what's really interesting is, the unofficial archives, they exist. Like a friend of mine in New York when I was in grad school, I couldn't get a hold to the Arsenio Hall Show on DVD. But one of my friends, shout out to Michael, Michael had all these VHS tapes of the Arsenio Hall with all the original commercials in them too. It was a trip to see, how they were working on us psychologically with those commercials back then as well.
So how did they become so popular? Like you talk about like how like in the past, like there's only certain roles that black actors could play. So I'd assume that there'd be like a lot of resistance to making these kinds of movies. So how do you think they became so popular?
That's a great question. Well, first, it is really contingent upon the success of Eddie Murphy. Eddie Murphy, without Eddie Murphy, there is no Black Pack because of the dominance of his comedic persona. Listen, when I'm teaching, it's kind of hard to qualify how big Eddie Murphy was in the 80s. He was, they call him the first rock star of comedy. Because a lot of times people now, they only understand Eddie Murphy from like the family-friendly, Nutty Professor type roles. But Eddie Murphy was a legit movie star. And he was a household name at the age of 19. Right, he rescued Saturday Night Live from the brink of cancellation after the departure of Lorne Michaels, the creator of the show. And so Eddie Murphy's popularity blew up. I'd make the argument all the time that people have this conversation about who is the most popular alum from Saturday Night Live, like who is the biggest star to come out of it? Is it Adam Sandler? Is it Tina Fey? I'm like, yo, that's easy. It's Eddie Murphy. It's not even close. And that's just objectively speaking, if you look at the box office numbers and everything from all of the films that he's done over time. But in the 1980s, while Eddie Murphy was still on the show, he was a movie star. He was starring in 48 Hours with Nick Nolte. That was a huge hit. He was starring in Trading Places. While he was still on the show, he became so big he had to leave the show. So Eddie Murphy's first three films grossed roughly $1 billion for Paramount Pictures. In the 80s, you know what I'm saying? Like, let's adjust that for inflation. What is that now? And so he had this astronomical star power. And what he was able to do was leverage that star power in a way that I don't think he gets enough credit for. And that's what the book is actually attempting to recover, was that Eddie Murphy, at the point in which he was at his peak of popularity, he didn't choose to continue to produce films where he was the only black person in the movie. He completely did a performative shift and created films that were all black, and he aligned himself with the Black Pack group. Now, another key function in terms of the creation of the Black Pack and its movement is the work of Robert Townsend. Because Robert Townsend was a struggling actor who also understood that Hollywood wasn't checking for black talent. He tells the story, and I write about this in the book, where he tells the story where he acted in a film called A Soldier's Story. It was directed by Norm Jewison. And this was a very prestigious prestige film in Hollywood. It was a period piece, ensemble cast, Denzel Washington, David Allen, just a really powerful ensemble film. And Robert Townsend naively felt like, shoot, I'm in this movie, it's gonna win an Oscar, it's gonna blow up, what is this gonna do for my career? And then he went back to Hollywood and didn't get any offers, didn't get any roles. And so he was confused by that. And he reached out to his agent, to commiserate. And his agent says, hey, Robert, what's going on? And he says, man, where are the roles? What's next? And the agent told him, Robert, I hate to break this to you, but in Hollywood, they only do one black movie a year, and you just did it. And it was at that moment where he activated the spirit of defiance and basically said, hey, look, if they're not going to recognize my talent, then I'm going to create something on my own. And he endeavors to produce, write, direct Hollywood Shuffle. He co-wrote with Keenen Ivory Wayans. And he produced this film on a series of credit cards. And it cost about 100 grand to make the film, and it made $5.2 million at the box office. Right? So it was a huge hit. Right? Think about that. 25 to 1, 100,000. You do the math. I'm an artist, you know what I'm saying? There it is. So those two figures and moments were critical to the formation of the Black Pack. Once Eddie Murphy saw Hollywood Shuffle, that crystallized that momentum. Eddie Murphy hired Robert Townsend to direct his next film, which was the stand-up comedy concert film Eddie Murphy Raw, which was co-written by Keenen Ivory Wayans. And then you just started to see the amalgamation of their talent, and it really created this moment and this movement that really changed the face of American humor.
And so since then, what happened after the Black Pack, and then where are we now?
You know, it's sad because in doing the research on this, you know, the question always comes up like, well, what happened? And I think that the Black Pack's cultural material was largely misunderstood by the industry, particularly by the establishment. If you go back, and I did the primary research on this, looking back at the reviews, the material that was written about the Black Pack in that moment, they were getting destroyed by white critics and the white establishment. But the films and the shows were making money, right? And so, you know, when you think about it in you know, I hate to be so crude about it, but Hollywood is about the bottom line, right? If it don't make dollars, it don't make sense. But ironically, there became this resistance to the Black Pack's cultural material. There was this pushback, right? This blacklash, this white blacklash against the Black Pack's material, as if they were becoming too big, too large, too successful. And what's ironic about it is their success is tied to their critique of the industry itself. And I think that type of backlash contributed to the pushback that they started to face. For example, Arsenio Hall brought the minister Louis Farrakhan onto his show, and that created this huge turmoil on the network. And so these kind of moments, this type of pushback from the establishment after about a decade really was the death knell to the movement. And you know, it became this question of like, well, who are we doing this for, and how can we continue to engage this defiant, resistant material within the mainstream discourse? So they received a lot of pushback, and ultimately, it was a moment. It was ephemeral, and now, you know, the Black Pack are still operating, still working. I mean, if you think about Eddie Murphy, for example, he didn't, after the Black Pack moment, he didn't do another R-rated film for about almost 30 years. So his last R-rated film, I want to say, was either The Boomerang or Vampire in Brooklyn. And then after that, it's Dr. Dolittle, it's Nutty Professor, it's Shrek, right? And it wasn't until he did Dolomite Is My Name that we get this really transgressive, you know, version of Eddie, this renegade Eddie that I grew up with. Like, oh, I was like, there it is. So he's supposed to be playing George Clinton in a Parliament Funkadelic movie that's supposed to be getting off the ground. That's what I want. I want to see that movie. Eddie Murphy as George Clinton. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, let's go.
So we have stuff to look forward to.
Right.
How about we open it up to the audience? I don't know if anybody else has questions out there. We've got a mic. We have a question all the way up at the front. Rachel, we'll go all the way to the front, then there, and then there.
Thank you, Rachel.
Hello. I have a question, Artel. It's so good to see you. You know, I couldn't miss this today. Given everything happening in the world right now, socially, politically, emotionally, do you see Black humor at more of a form of healing, resistance, or both? And how does the Black Pact speak to that? And that's question one, and I'm just going to do another quick question so that people can go. You write about comedians who use laughter to challenge power and shift culture. Who do you think carries that torch today? And what responsibility does that comedy have in this moment?
Thank you for that. This is one of my favorite people in the world. So it just, my heart is soaring like a hawk right now. So thank you for that question. Yeah, to the first part, I would say that it's definitely both. And it's really interesting because humor is often thought of as the antithesis of seriousness, right? It's comedy. It's not to be taken seriously. It's just jokes. But I was really interested in pushing back against this idea because as I started to pull on this thread and this fabric and developing this idea of Black resistance humor, I started to see that it goes way, way back. It isn't generated with the Black Pact itself, and that was important for me to connect that tradition, that ancient tradition, to the Black Pact's material because they're picking up on an impulse that, I think really goes back to survival, Black Americanism, being a Black in America, in this bitterly caustic terrain. Well, how do you survive the politics of the plantation? You laughing to keep from crying, And so to your second part of the question, I mentioned a few, but I think about people like the two dope queens on HBO. I think about Jessica Williams and Phoebe. I think about people like, one of my favorites is I like to think about Donald Glover. I really am drawn to Donald Glover, not as an acolyte of the Black Pact in terms of his stand-up material, but more so in terms of his television show, Atlanta. I think it takes the genre of the sitcom and completely upends it. It's like the anti-sitcom. And what he's doing is he's using humor and satire to disrupt and to engage in this very real, almost surreal conversation with Blackness in terms of addressing the American racial condition. Thank you for that question.
Yeah, there's one more. Another question there.
Hi, Professor. I'm very excited to get a look at this book. Something I really wanted to ask is, when we're looking at obviously a lot of political strife going on, but also just a completely, shifting culture of, I think, Black creatives finally having some voice in mainstream media. I think hopefully you see Issa Rae's Insecure all over HBO. You see Jordan Peele's shift from major comedy into a monumental horror career, into Ryan Coogler, most nominated film in history for the Oscars for a Black directed, a Black written, a Black starring film with 16 nominations. I think so many young creatives are seeing this shift and feel a little lost of how do we take history, like what the Black Pact went through, and how do we see artists coming up today and connect those? So with your work, with the Black Pact, how would you motivate or try to invigorate young artists to use this work to educate themselves to keep pushing forward in the culture?
I love that question. Thank you for that. First thing I say is take my classes. No, I know you did, but you asked me. No, that's what you first go do. Come get some of this knowledge. But no, to your point, I think that's a great question. And my answer to that is create. I think a lot of times, and I make this point to my students, and perhaps I even made it to you, is that there's this idea that, Hollywood is going to come to save me. I'm going to get discovered. Somebody going to discover me. I'm going to be found. And then, I'm going to be able to do the type of work that I'm interested in doing. And I think now with the kind of democratization of technology and the means of production, I tell emerging filmmakers is to create. Don't wait for permission, right? You don't need anybody else's permission. And don't fixate yourself as Hollywood as the only option. Like, define success on your own terms. And then number three, don't be afraid, like, to put yourself out there. I mean, fear is natural on the one hand. On the other hand, I would say fear can work in two ways. It could either hold you back, or it can propel you forward. So what I would encourage emerging and young folks to say is, don't allow the fear to hold you back, but allow it to propel you forward.
Good answer. There's another question over there.
Hi, I am actually also from the west side of Chicago, so it's good to see you here. I also grew up sort of watching things that I shouldn't watch, more so like in the 90s, like in Living Color and Def Comedy Jam and Friday and things like that. And I was just wondering, so compared to back then, it seems like there are a lot of black auteurs, like the question before me just mentioned, but it seems like there's fewer black stand-up. And then when you look on Netflix, which is the Comedy Central of, it's the pipeline that people come up through now, but you look on Netflix for stand-up and you see very few black people compared to like back in the day in the 90s. It seemed like black people dominated stand-up. And it seems like that's a route that a lot of black comedians and just like a lot of black comedians came through. And so I was wondering if you could speak to sort of the reduced visibility. I know this isn't exclusively about stand-up, but like the reduced visibility of black people in stand-up and how that might affect the visibility of black people in contemporary black comedy spaces. Thank you.
Love this question. And we repping Chicago all day. Thank you for that. The answer is, and again, forgive me for being so, I'm not intended to be so crude about it, but Hollywood has a superpower. And that superpower is the power of co-optation, okay? And the reason why co-optation, Hollywood can identify something that's hot, that's trending, that's bubbling, and then reproduce it, repackage it, but empty it out of its social depth, of its social power. And this is something that happens over and over again. And so in that cultural moment of which you speak, this was a moment where humor, not just like you mentioned in terms of stand-up, there were platforms that were being used, but then, here come Russell Simmons and his Def Comedy Jam. And on the surface, it's like, oh, it's visibility. But it's also emptying out because a lot of the humor that was being disseminated on that show wasn't really resistant. It was actually quite scatological. Same thing with Comedy Central. So now we see this moment, and we're going to co-opt this moment and then empty it out. Just think of the same thing occurs in music. Lauryn Hill wins all these Grammys, never makes another record. Why? You see what I'm saying? So it's the power of co-optation. So the second book, the sequel to this book, I'm going to address all of that. Like, what happened? The 90s was like this golden age of blackness across all of these dimensions. If you think about, Toni Morrison is winning the Nobel Prize for Literature in the 90s. We see the emergence of black public intellectuals like Skip Gates and Bell Hooks and Cornel West in the 90s. Right? Almost all of these cultural categories, from the Huxtables to, A Different World to Spike Lee to, all of these cultural categories, black people was at the top. But August Wilson in theater, what happened? Well, that's the second book, right? So I'm coming. We on that. Yeah, that's the type of time we on. Thank you for that.
All right, well, this is the last question because we're running out of time.
Hi, Dr. G. If you could be any member of the Black Pack, who would you be and why?
That's a great question. They all have so many different careers. So I'll give you two answers. Paul Mooney and Eddie Murphy. And I say Paul Mooney first because he was just fearless. he was fearless. He didn't care, right? He didn't care about none of that. He was like, Rick James, on the couch. You know what I'm saying? Forget your couch, right? Paul Mooney was iconoclastic, but he was just really brilliant and acerbically funny, but he used history to undergird his comedic discourse. It wasn't just like, hey, I'm telling jokes. He read, right? He studied, and he used that as a bridge, to build a bridge to actually say something meaningful in terms of popular culture and in terms of the discourse. And he paid a price for it, but it's something courageous and very bold about that. And I admire that. And I wish he was here to be able to see this particular work. I think he would have said, good job, homie. And then I would also say, to the second part, I would say Eddie Murphy, but not for the reasons you think. I would say Eddie Murphy because of the longevity. I mean, Eddie Murphy is, like I said, he was doing it since he was 19. He in his, mid-60s now? And he really changed a lot over time. But I think that type of longevity is something to be said about that. And I also liked his approach, which was antithetical to Paul Mooney, because Eddie's approach was far more subversive. His approach to Black resistance humor in a film like, say, for example, Harlem Nights, where he brings together 3 generations of Black comedians. Right? He brings together Della Reese. He brings together Red Fox and Richard Pryor and Eddie Murphy, because wasn't nobody checking for that in Hollywood. Eddie Murphy did that, right? And for example, a film like Boomerang. I remember being in grad school in New York, and one of my friends, she was in Harlem, and she told me, hey, I told her what I was researching, and she said, you know what? I wouldn't even be in my career if it wasn't for the movie Boomerang. And I was like, well, what you mean? I didn't know Black people could work in advertising and marketing until I saw the film. And that created a pathway, an aspirational pathway in her mind to open up the vision of the possible. And so that to me is quite powerful. And that to me is why I would choose Eddie Murphy. But that's a great question. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for all those wonderful questions. And thank you, Dr. Great, for contextualizing all this for us, for your wonderful book, The Black Pack, which is available for purchase here and for checkout at the library. And now I for sure want to watch all these films again. And like I mentioned, they're available here at the library. So let's give Dr. Great one more round of applause.
Thank you for coming out, everybody.